Ye Shang was crossing the tribulation, and the 9 heavenly thunder tribulations kept hitting her. Below were the disciples of the Eternal Sword Sect. Suddenly, when the 9 heavenly thunder tribulations fiercely smashed down a red one, she disappeared, but in the eyes of his disciples, it was Ye Changlao's death that dissipated. Ye Shang is not an indigenous person of the Xuantian Continent. She was originally a normal third-year high school student in modern society. She crossed the Xuantian Continent and finally worked hard from an outsider to become an elder of the Eternal Sword Sect. She was even less likely to become a high-ranking figure, but when she ascended to immortality, she returned to her original form, returned to modern society, and returned to her own body. However, she once again faced a change in the world. The end of the day is approaching, and the zombies are rampant. Unfortunately, her Dao heart is solid and firm, otherwise she will definitely collapse. Reading Guide 1. This article has a male lead and a CP, but the female lead is definitely strong. 2. I hope everyone can read in a civilized manner and avoid getting dirty when exporting. 3. If you like it, please vote for it. Thank you. Bow. Key words of the novel. Opening technique: I rely on cultivating immortals to hoard goods in the end of the world without pop-ups. Opening technique: I rely on cultivating immortals to hoard goods in the end of the world. Download the complete set of TXT. Opening technique: I rely on cultivating immortals to hoard goods in the end of the world. Read the latest chapter on this. Chapter 1. How to eliminate the path of death. Light Shadow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. How to eliminate the path of death. Light Shadow. Ye Shang rubbed her head and sat up straight. Her mind was still filled with the explosion of the 9 heavenly thunderbolt calamity. When the last one was still accumulating strength, she was just about to change into a top-notch robe to resist, but the already chopped array on her body had disappeared. In an instant, the thunderous and restless routine in the accumulated energy struck directly, only to feel the buzzing of brain melon seeds. In the next moment, darkness struck. She hesitated for a long time before shaking her head and looking around at the situation. In this moment, her whole person is devastated. She really wants to go outside and accuse thieves. God, are you his mother? Deliberately. The place where she woke up happened to be her home before crossing over to the Xuantian Continent. She was originally just a high school graduate preparing to enter university, and now it was summer vacation. She had been staying at home before wearing clothes to the Xuantian Continent. Unexpectedly, when she returned to this point, the world had already come to an end. She grew up living with her grandmother, but unfortunately, her grandmother was already seriously ill and had been hospitalized. A few days ago, when she received her college admission letter, she smiled and closed her eyes before passing away. My grandmother used to like to hoard goods, especially food. This was the idea of the older generation, who always felt that there was surplus food at home and didn't panic. She was also grateful that these foods kept her at home for so long. There is a house in the urban area at home, and my grandmother said it was left by her parents before they left. They passed away in a plane crash during a business trip when she was younger. She recalled her memories of this period of time and her experience during crossing the tribulation, as if it were all like a dream. She had spent more than 2,000 years in the world of cultivation, and along the way, she had been diligent in learning and practicing, with seclusion being the norm. Except for occasional times when she needed to cross the tribulation, she would go out of the sect to experience. The leader once said that her aptitude was very good and she had the potential to become an immortal. But why did she return to her original form at the last moment of becoming an immortal? Ye Shang originally fell to the ground, sat on the ground for a while, then slowly got up and opened the window. There were not many memories in her mind, they were all memories that existed before she traveled. The only difference was that she was running a fever, feeling dizzy. My mind was in chaos, and the TV in the living room was always on. This was her favorite thing to do during the summer vacation, watching TV while doing homework. There was also a lot of savings at home, all of which were compensation from her parents. Grandma was very frugal, so the two of them didn't spend much on it. At this time, the TV could no longer be broadcasted. Many tables, chairs, and cabinets were blocked in front of her door and window, and she dared not go out at all. According to my current memory, I have not gone out for 2 months, which means that I have been eating the food stored at home before the end of the day for the past 2 months. No matter who knocked on the door, she never opened it. She had no family in the world long ago, and even if the school played well, everyone was basically in their hometown. It was impossible to come to find her from such a distance, so no matter how they knocked or smashed outside, they dared not open it. Those who could push and block the door at home were pushed over. Ye Shang's forehead was covered in fine sweat, and her shoulder-length hair was scattered. The sweat-soaked strands of hair pressed against her cheeks, and her lips were scorched. She struggled to stand up on the sofa. Waiting to sit on the sofa, she finally started using the techniques she had learned before. Unfortunately, she didn't have spiritual power for a while, and she felt a bit frustrated. In the modern world, there is no spiritual energy. She couldn't practice, so she had to experiment the same way. She had learned a lot of kung fu, even if it was a basic one. Just as she was in a state of impatience, her body became increasingly weak. It was unclear whether it was due to the 2 shuttles of her soul or the current changes in the world. After repeatedly experimenting, she finally found a technique called Yuning Ju that worked. In an instant, she sensed that her body gradually gathered some strength. Although she didn't know what energy it was, at least it slowly helped her body reduce her high fever. In the next moment, her whole body was changing, and it was also in this moment that no one saw a black hole the size of a fist appear, with a flash of red and white light inside, and then disappear again. Ye Shang's body is gradually recovering and even healthier than before. She has decided to make the Imperial Energy technique her primary cultivation method. After she opened her eyes suddenly lit up, and she saw a sword suspended in front of her, which was her original sword, Light Shadow. The sword body was red and white, with a simple ring hanging from the tip. A smile instantly appeared on Ye Shang's face. She took the ring, which was a space ring she had collected materials to create. The space inside was as large as 5 football fields. It was a simple style that she had used all her resources to create when she was almost 1,000 years old. It was like a modern silver ring, just a thin small circle with many runes carved on it. She put the ring on her hand, her consciousness instantly fused, connected, and contracted again. There were not many things inside, and she remained secluded all year round. She only had a few sets of robes, all of which were made by her using various materials. The remaining ones were some pigu pills and other healing pills. She thought for a moment that there seemed to be not much food left at home, and felt a little helpless. Fortunately, you appeared, otherwise it would be really sad next, she said. The light shadow sword swayed up and down in balance, then a red and white light flashed, disappearing the figure. The next moment, it appeared in the space ring, and the light shadow habitually hung on a purple sandalwood card slot created for him by his master. Generally, if Ye Shang needs a light shadow, it can appear in her hand in an instant, which is the agility of the light shadow sword. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Black Robe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Black Robe. Ye Shang finished organizing her memory, which was her own body. Although for some unknown reason, her soul went back and forth without any abnormality, even silently like water. Ye Shang sorted out all the food that could be eaten at home. It has been 2 months since the zombie outbreak, and to be honest, being able to stay at home for 2 months has all been thanks to the fact that he and his grandmother used to idle around and gather food, which helped him save money and survive. Although my body has recovered somewhat now, I have had a fever for a day and a night before, and I don't know what changes have occurred. In my memory, when I watched TV news, it was said that some people would turn into zombies if they had a fever, while others would develop abilities, and I don't know what abilities she has. In the early stages of the apocalypse, many people had not yet realized it. On the contrary, at that time, due to water and power outages, they tried to gather a lot of water. Nowadays, even if they were frugal, they couldn't save money. Without electricity, it's okay, but without water, those grains couldn't be eaten. Ye Shang didn't care about anything at all. He cleaned up everything in the house, including clothes, beds, sofas, and a series of kitchen utensils. I went back to the room where my grandmother used to live before her death. There was a stone slab underground, and when I opened it, it was filled with pre-prepared food. Because it was too troublesome to make it with water, I had to eat basic dry food or snacks that she had prepared herself. Her room was also like my grandmother's. There was a stone slab below, and she would usually work to earn money to buy food. All she bought were junk food with a long shelf life. My grandmother has said it a few times, but I can't help it. Although their lifestyles and habits are similar, this is her only stubborn behavior as a young person. Unfortunately, she has eaten almost all her food, and now there is only the food left for Grandma. Unveiling the slate, almost the entire room was filled with rice, flour, and oil. It was amazing, my grandmother. Did you anticipate the end of the world after your death before you died? Ye Shang hardly had a moment to spare, moving all the food into the space like a little squirrel, and worked tirelessly for half an hour before finishing. When she came out, she walked around the house again and moved all her wardrobe, clothes, and TV cabinet inside. The space ring has accompanied her for thousands of years, and it also has some spiritual energy. As long as she throws something in, it will almost always be summarized in an instant, and it will not appear dirty, messy, or bad. Even her robes have been summarized in the wardrobe she just threw in. Moving to the end, until there was no room to move, she looked at the empty home and was a little stunned. The home she had lived in for 17 years was already fading away in her memory, perhaps because she came back again, so her memory became clearer and clearer. At the age of 17, she should go to college after the summer vacation. Her ideal day was to continue living a leisurely life as an elder of the Wangu Sword Sect in the Xuantian Continent after becoming an immortal, but unfortunately, the thief god did not allow it. Ye Shang covered his eyes, leaned against the wall, and finally sneered, perhaps fate has never been on her side. After tidying up everything, she changed into her own robe, a black robe, sewn very simply, but the cloud patterns on it were extremely fine, and even the whole body was composed of formations. Although her movements were a bit inconvenient, it did not affect her. After all, she had been wearing this robe for thousands of years, and the most important thing was that wearing it would not easily be bitten by zombies. Her robe was almost entirely black in color, with simple patterns. When she had the embroidery lady sew it, she didn't pay much for manual labor. She was very poor, and almost all of it was used to buy refining materials. Also, because this black robe does not pay attention to style, the materials used for making it are relatively cheaper. This house can no longer be occupied, and all the cabinets, tables, and other items that were blocking the door and bed were sent to the space. It was only then that I saw the bloodstains on top, and even the door was cut open several times. I don't know if it's a zombie or human-made. Ye Shang carried her pink backpack that had been used for many years. It was bought by her grandmother when she was admitted to high school, and it had a good capacity to hold many books. But now it's empty. She plans to first find some supplies, and then go to the human-built base. Although I don't know how many, the official must have built them. Let's go to City first, which has always been the National Operations Center. During this period of time, some places may have become climates, but it is also a time of great chaos. When there is no order in the world, human life is the least valuable. At least she wants to live, even if she perseveres along the way. She once held this idea in the Xuantian Continent. Ye Shang took out the light shadow sword. There's no one around now. Let's go outside and take a look first. As soon as she walked out of the room, she saw a monster with half a brain hanging in front of her. Ye Shang wielded his sword and swung it fiercely. Until she chopped the monster into pieces, she only took 2 steps back. So this is the zombie. He looks really ugly. She had a small wooden face and her hair tied into a ponytail. After leaving the door, she didn't leave alone. Just a little bit of energy, although not as pure as spiritual energy, and I don't know what kind of energy it is, at least a bit of power is not. Climbing up the wall and looking outside, the street is fine. There aren't many zombies because there aren't many people, but when you leave the main urban area, it's not necessarily there. It's almost always full of people there. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Searching for supplies and entering large supermarkets. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Searching for supplies and entering large supermarkets. There is no one around her house now, except for her as a living person, all are zombies. Ye Shang's memory of modernity has become increasingly clear in her mind. She remembers that there was a small shop around the corner before, and she doesn't know if there was anything else there. Previously, an elderly person was guarding. Ye Shang held her breath all the way and walked towards that direction. Damn it, it was a difficult time. Although there were many Pigu pills in the space, she had been in seclusion for 200 years before crossing the tribulation, so she had already eaten them and had not left much. If we don't take advantage of the fact that we are still in the early stages to find more things, we will definitely be plundered by others in the later stages. She must find more now, so that even if she goes to the deep mountains and forests for cultivation in the future, she doesn't have to worry about not having anything to eat. Before becoming an immortal, it is impossible not to eat it, especially now that it is impossible to refine the Pai Gu Dan. One is that there are no ingredients, and the other is that she does not know. Previously, she only searched and exchanged some from the sect's pharmacy. All of her money has been used for cultivating and crossing the tribulation formation. After arriving at the destination, what he saw was nothing. Ye Shang was somewhat disappointed, but it was still expected. It seems that we can only go to the large supermarket on the outer street to take a look. Ye Shang held a light shadow and killed the zombies all the way. Under her sword, the heads of these zombies were almost like watermelons. With each strike, they were slow to move, and when they saw someone, they slowly walked up and grinned. Most ordinary people are afraid and have weak legs, so they are eaten before they can react. But some people can see their differences, at least they can swing their sticks and hit them back. When Ye Shang was killing these zombies, he deliberately avoided them and was wearing a robe. He hardly seemed to have come out of the pile of zombies and was very clean. The light shadow sword had also been cut without any marks, and the stains on the sword body were hardly stained. Until she arrived at the entrance of this large supermarket all the way, her hands were numb. She cut over all the way and killed so many zombies, but after passing by, she still appeared continuously. Even though the light shadow sword was trying its best to cooperate with her, her body couldn't control the completely strong light shadow now. The supermarket door was tightly closed, indicating that someone was inside. Ye Shang reached out and knocked, shouting, "Open the door." After a while, there was no response inside, nor did anyone open the door. Ye Shang lowered his eyes, lifted his light shadow sword, and with a click, the chain began to break from the middle. The iron door opened wide, and there were many people sitting on the ground inside. Almost everyone looked towards this side, and some people shouted, "Don't come in." Various shouts kept coming out one after another. A man dressed in a suit and elite attire walked up and frowned, "If you want to come in, hurry up." On the other side, a woman screamed, "Ah!" She broke the iron door, "Hurry up and drive her out." Unfortunately, no one on site heard her cry. Ye Shang walked in, then turned around and closed the door, just casually turning the chain a few more times. There are quite a few people on site. It seems that so many people have survived through this supermarket for quite some time. There are children, elderly people, women, as well as office workers, almost all sitting on the ground, and almost all the furniture and supplies in the supermarket are placed in this hall. They were not surprised to see Ye Shang's bizarre attire. Nowadays, many young people like to wear hanfu, or cosplay is also a hobby of young people nowadays. Ye Shang no longer looked at them. With so many people, there must be nothing to eat in the food area. She was planning to find some daily necessities that few people would pay attention to now. At this moment, a young man walked up and said, "You'd better not go up, there are zombies on top." Ye Shang glanced at her, didn't answer, and walked straight up. The young man saw her go up like this, gritted his teeth, and followed him up. She continued, "If you don't pay attention, you'll get bitten. When we were here, we didn't pay attention, and some people got bitten." Ye Shang responded lightly and said, When Zhu Kaining saw that she didn't listen to her, she sighed and said, "Let me take you there. There's almost nothing to eat now, but I know there must be something to eat somewhere, and no one else knows." Ye Shang raised his eyebrows and looked at her, "Do you know?" Zhu Kaining chuckled and said, "This supermarket is owned by my uncle." Ye Shang stopped and said, "Why did you tell me? There were so many people below that you didn't tell." Zhu Kaining clearly understood what she was saying, and she pouted, "I'm not willing to tell them. When the zombies first erupted, they ate and robbed here, and in the end, my uncle was eaten by the zombies because of their selfishness." At this point, she lowered her head in some sadness. The previous outbreak had the highest pedestrian flow in the supermarket. Her uncle had not even come out, so she took strict measures to close all the iron doors. However, some people were in a hurry to go out and go home to find their families, and so on. As a result, some of them came back with their families and planned to live and eat in the supermarket for free, while others did not come back. However, zombies were rampant outside, and they gathered a bunch of people to smash the door. In the end, their uncle had to open the door and let them in, but they pushed them out to feed the zombies. She was stuffed into the surveillance room by her uncle at the time, which was safe, hidden, and without anyone, and she could see people from all over the place. She watched helplessly as her uncle was killed by them. When she quietly sneaked out, no one in the crowd cared about these things, almost all of them were frantically grabbing food and drink. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Supermarket Warehouse Materials Collection and Delivery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Supermarket Warehouse Materials Collection and Delivery. Zhu Kaining was willing to tell Ye Shang because she came alone now and was not afraid of the zombies outside, so she planned to follow this person. Ye Shang doesn't care about her story, but at least for now, she can provide what she needs. Zhu Kaining led Ye Shang all the way to her uncle's office. Someone wanted to follow behind, but suddenly a few zombies appeared upstairs after the two of them walked. They didn't know if they couldn't get down or if they would only wander slowly on the flat ground. At least blocking those people. Zhu Kaining followed Ye Shang step by step, especially after watching her kill several zombies. Without blinking, she became even more determined in her thoughts. "On this side, I have the key in my hand," Zhu Kaining whispered. The two walked to the back of a corridor, passing through layers of hanger and shoe areas until there was a door behind the hidden curtain. Zhu Kaining opened the door with a key, took Ye Shang inside, and then brought the door over. As soon as Ye Shang entered, he was startled for a moment, realizing that this place was full of supplies. Zhu Kaining took a flashlight and turned it on, his eyes curved and he said, "This is the entire stocking area of the supermarket. Every time, it's basically my uncle bringing his 2 employees in to move in. Almost no one knows about it. After my uncle left, he worried about me and told me about it. I've seen it, but it's almost closed here. I'm a bit scared, so I didn't stay all the time. Instead, I went out to the lobby with those people." Ye Shang also looked at everything with satisfaction. The entire warehouse almost contained everything that could be used for food, drink, and salad in all directions. Zhu Kaining walked to the side and took a packet of potato chips and tore them open. "Hee hee, that's it now. The two of us can stay here and not go out. Just wait for the army to come and rescue us, he said. Ye Shang had no expression on his face, but he had already begun to calculate in his heart. The little girl clearly wanted to exchange these supplies for a future place to live. Zhu Caning turned to Ye Shang and said, "It would be great to find my parents when the time comes. I am studying here, but my parents are from a city and came to visit my uncle's place during the summer vacation. But now I have no choice. My uncle is dead, and I don't know what's going on with my parents." Ye Shang raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "If I take you to your parents and safely deliver you, will you give me all these supplies?" After speaking, his tone paused. It can also be said to be a transaction. The light from the flashlight was very faint, but there was also a hint of seriousness on Ye Shang's face. Zhu Caning slowed down as she picked up the potato chips and lowered her head, saying, "Sure, but can you finish moving them?" She was not sure either. Originally, this was meant to be taken back with those who came to rescue her, at least to find a new place to stay. Ye Shang didn't talk nonsense and said straightforwardly, "You know very well that the rescue team doesn't know when it will come, and you can't just stay here waiting, can you? Do you think those people in the hall below will have no brains? There are also smart people among them. Will they really keep waiting below when they see you come up but not turn into a zombie?" Zhu Caning naturally knew this too. She bit her lip and said, "Sure, but you have to ensure my life is safe." Ye Shang sneered and said, "I can guarantee that the zombie won't kill you, but I can't guarantee your behavior. After all, if you die, even immortals cannot be safely preserved." Zhu Caning nodded happily and said, "Don't worry, I will be very obedient and will definitely follow you steadily." Although she didn't know why she believed in her so much, she believed in her intuition that this person would definitely lead her to find her parents. Ye Shang then took out a pen and paper and swiped a line of characters on it, then handed it to her and said, "Sign your name." Although post-apocalyptic robbery is also a normal behavior, isn't it now their private property? Zhu Caning opened his mouth in disbelief and took the paper, which read simply, "I voluntarily gave all the supplies in the supermarket, including the warehouse, to Ye Shang. In addition, Ye Shang needs to protect the safety of the giver until his parents are found." Zhu Caning withdrew his chin and said, "It shouldn't be." Although he said so, he still signed his name with the pen in Ye Shang's hand. Ye Shang took back the paper and saw the name on it. He raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. Then, in front of Zhu Caning, he waved his hand and the thing on the ground where she was standing disappeared. Zhu Caning widened her eyes and watched as Ye Shang was busy, his potato chips being squeezed into thin pieces. She trembled and pointed at Ye Shang, saying, "Are you a superpower?" Ye Shang waved his hand and gave a faint response, "I guess so." Then she continued to work hard. If she had the previous strength, why bother her so much? With a big wave of her hand, wherever she could see and move her mind, she could all enter the space and stay. Zhu Caning watched helplessly as she finished moving all the things in the warehouse. Finally, I had to ask in a daze, "Is your ability level 1? Ye Shang thought for a moment and replied, "Maybe so, but I think the space is quite spacious." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Lesser Development. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Lesser Development. After knowing the answer, Zhu Caning deeply believed that she must hold her thighs firmly. She knew about the ability, because there were two downstairs who had awakened their abilities. At first, many people had a fever, some became zombies, and some became psychics, but the chance was very small. So many people, only those two. So initially, everyone tied up those with fever and waited for them to wake up again. Ye Shang said, "Let's go outside and collect things. We just came all the way and there are still many things that can be used." Zhu Caning nodded and said, "Okay." The two of them walked out in front of each other, and this supermarket was very large, almost the largest in the entire city. That's why so many people were able to survive for 2 months without going out to search for food. A large city means more people, and with more people, there are naturally zombies everywhere. And it's too far from Cydia here, it takes half a day by plane, let alone walking now, but if you're lucky enough to get a car, it's also good. Zhu Kaining kept talking non-stop all the way, eating shredded potato chips and babbling about his situation, where he was from, how many relatives he had at home, where his hometown was, where he studied, and so on. Ye Shang remained silent all the way, occasionally responding, but almost everything was being collected, including clothes, shoes, bed sheets, curtains, shampoo, shower gel, and other daily necessities. Regardless, he put everything away. The space ring is automatically organized, neat and uniform, even neater than the supermarket. Ye Shang looked at it a few times and was very satisfied. It was not in vain that she had spent a lot of money to find the head of the refining sect to obtain a specialized rune formation. After almost both of them had moved out of the supermarket, it was already 2 hours later. Zhu Kaining went from being shocked at first to becoming numb later on. She really didn't expect her emptiness ability to be so great, so capable of pretending. Later, Ye Shang said to her, if we were to go with the army, we might go smoothly, but we need to be indecent and develop. Zhu Kaining nodded and said, you make sense. I haven't had a fever yet, but I'm afraid if I were to be with the army, I might be killed immediately. Ye Shang fell silent for a moment. She learned from Zhu Kaining that some people have a fever that lasts for several days. At that time, she only had 1 day and 1 night. However, she heard that some people below had a fever that lasted for 5 days but did not recover, but they were still able to withstand it without eating or drinking, and eventually turned into zombies. What if the army finds it a bit troublesome? After all, we have walked so far to a city, and there are even so many people who cannot wait for everyone with a fever to recover. The most likely thing is to be left behind directly. Your concern is reasonable, Ye Shang nodded slightly. Zhu Kaining continued, let's take a day off first and depart tomorrow. It's best to get a car then. There's my uncle's car in the garage, but the road conditions outside feel better with an off-road vehicle. Well, we'll go out and look for it later. Ye Shang's space is full of supplies, and she's not in a hurry anymore. The two of them found a bed in the area where bedding was sold before, each with soft cushions on top. Ye Shang prepared to use them before putting them away. The bed was not of much use, as she had already moved in from her home. However, Zhu Kaining probably didn't have it. Anyway, let's collect more and let her go for a wash. Without any knowledge, Zhu Kaining, who was regarded as a future worker, was now groaning and binding the sheets. She was preparing to directly wrap the outside with the sheets, at least for a space. She asked, isn't it convenient for us to find a room directly? Why sleep in such a dangerous place? Although Ye Shang has just cleaned up a lot of zombies, this floor is on the 3rd floor and there are hardly any zombies left. Some things have also been used to block the stairs, and the zombies will not be able to go upstairs yet. But what if something suddenly pops up somewhere? It's still not as safe as the surveillance room she stayed in before. Ye Shang said, you can directly face the gate here. If there is any movement, you can run away in an instant. You can't hear or see anything in those rooms, let alone run away. If a large army of zombies comes, there will be quite a few people in this city. After explaining so much, Zhu Kaining nodded and said, so that's the case, or do you understand a bit? After hanging up the curtain, she lay tired on the other side of the bed and said, can you help me install a bed in your space then? I estimate there will be some outdoor camping in the back. Ye Shang responded. Then she sat cross-legged on the bed and began practicing the Imperial Energy technique. There was only a slight sensation, but it was also energy. She called this gas energy because she didn't know what it was, but it was definitely not spiritual energy. At midnight, the iron doors of the supermarket clattered and it started raining outside. In this weather, there is a large temperature difference between day and night, which is almost hot during the day but cold at night. Fortunately, Ye Shang's robe has the effect of being warm in winter and cool in summer, making it very comfortable for her to wear. Ye Shang almost always meditated and practiced, and perhaps Xuantian felt that she was there, but instead slept soundly. The sound of thunder began, and Ye Shang frowned slightly. Perhaps because she had fallen under the 9 heavens thunderstorm before, she opened her eyes and gave up practicing, feeling a bit uncomfortable. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Sword Light Cutting Through Flames. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Sword Light Cutting Through Flames. At this point, the chain of the iron door in the lower hall was once again destroyed, and this time it was directly melted. Someone woke up and shouted loudly, and Ye Shang naturally heard it too. She stood up, lifted the sheets hung by Xuantian, stood at the railing on the 3rd floor, and looked down. Almost everyone in the hall woke up, and some children were startled and cried loudly. The man in a slightly wrinkled suit approached again and asked, "Who are you?" The people who came in were 3 men and 2 women, almost all in a soaked state. One of the boys was unconscious and carried by the other boy. A girl loudly said, "We've been knocking on the door for a long time, but you won't open it, so we naturally have to destroy it." She was the only person among the few who had the ability to melt all metals at high temperatures, possibly at a low level. It took almost 20 minutes just to melt this iron lock. The woman who had yelled at Ye Shang before shouted again, "You broke the lock, we're all going to die." She trembled as she pointed at the girl. A young boy stood beside him and said, "Go ahead, don't worry about them." The man in the suit's ability is shadow splitting, so he held a wooden stick and greeted several people. The war situation was almost on the verge of breaking out, and those who were originally sitting didn't know whether it was because of the pent-up emotions from letting Ye Shang in earlier, or because the activity area had been in this hall for a while, and food was getting less and less. In short, the anger in their hearts suddenly emerged. Anyway, more and more people are standing up and heading towards those young people. Suddenly, a red light appeared, and the man in the suit was first hit by the flames. He quickly took off his suit jacket. The next moment, he immediately counterattacked, and saw his shadow detach from himself, becoming an independent human form. It was like he controlled his shadow to strike the young man. The young man who knew how to control the fire quickly jumped away and said to several friends, "Go behind me, I set fire to them." Xuantian upstairs was also awakened. She rubbed her eyes and lifted the curtain to see Ye Shang standing on the railing, looking downstairs. She walked over and saw a row of flames running across the center of the supermarket. The cash register was mostly filled with flames, blocking those few people and a group of people rushing inside. "My good boy, how long has it been?" "It's just like this." Upon hearing her voice, Ye Shang did not respond. Instead, he looked at those supernatural powers in thought. Is this a supernatural power? Different from the techniques in the cultivation world. And the shadow of the man in the suit has also been melted, unable to come out temporarily. Every time he condenses his shadow, he has to put in a lot of effort. To be honest, he thinks this ability is very weak, but at least it is also a special ability. There is also a child whose little fingers condense a little bit of thick liquid, playing in the palm of his hand without attacking anyone, and honestly nestling in his grandfather's arms. Ye Shang had a faint smile on his face. Humans, no matter when it comes, are always competing. They are not killed by zombies, but even destroyed by their own kind. Until the few people below gradually called in and got closer. Xuantian slowly widened her eyes. The few people below seemed a bit familiar to her. She grabbed Ye Shang's arm and looked pitifully, "Big shot, those seem to be my classmates. Please help them." Ye Shang lowered his eyes as she pulled his arm and said, "Let go." Xuantian withdrew his hand, but still clasped his hands and said, "Boss, please help them. They are all my classmates. Those unlucky ones didn't even go home. Hey. She has been pleading all along. For a long time." Ye Shang just glanced over and said, After speaking, she took the light shadow and went down. She didn't intend to put it away, because she knew from Zhu Caning's mouth that role-playing was going on. She was dressed in a robe and held a sword in her hand, playing the role of an ancient person. Even though it was strange, it wasn't very abrupt. Ye Shang walked up to a flame, and with a sweep of the sword light, the flames instantly extinguished. There was also a flash of lightning outside, and lightning came down, shining on her sword body. Everyone's gaze turned, but Ye Shang didn't look at them. He walked straight to the boys and said, "Follow me." Except for the two who had a fever on their backs, the other three of them all hung up to some extent. There was still a little flame standing in the palm of his hand. Zhang Yiyang said with a slightly long mouth, "Are you?" Zhu Caning is on top. The girl next to her looked happy and said, "Ning Ning is also here." Ye Shang. After finishing speaking, he turned back and saw the man in a suit who had been injured quite a bit. Just as he was about to stop him, he saw the woman stop him and said, "You can't take them up. The iron door is not locked now, and all the people below us are slaughtered sheep. You have to stay below." Ye Shang pointed at her heart and said indifferently, "Get out of the way, I don't mind killing people in this world." In the realm of cultivation, it was a time of the fittest, and even among peers, there were still countless conflicts, killing and profiting. When one cultivates to the point of not being involved in human life, it was basically like the end of the world now, with human life as worthless as grass. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Probability. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Probability. The woman's face turned pale with fear in an instant. The whole world was in chaos now, with a lot of burning, killing, and robbing. She immediately stepped back and dared not speak again. Ye Shang no longer looked at them, but rather at the girl who could melt metal. She picked up the iron pipe that had fallen when those people came over to hit someone earlier, which was obviously broken off from the iron frame commonly sold in the supermarket before. She picked it up and walked to the iron door. Perhaps because it was hollow, she melted quickly and almost instantly pasted on the iron door, just welding the two doors together. She clapped her hands and said, "I think we can do it now." At this point, Ye Shang had already reached the third floor. After bringing the people up, he no longer cared about them and was free for Zhu Caning to take over. Zhu Caning stepped forward and hugged the other girl who had not yet developed any abilities, saying, "Xia Xia, you scared me to death. Why haven't you left City?" Young Jinxia also had lingering fear and said, "I was playing here with Orange, but we couldn't go back. I wanted to go back to the school dormitory to hide, but we didn't have enough food we had saved up, so we had to come out. I happened to meet a few classmates who were hiding from school together. Several of them were bitten to death, and some even turned into that kind of monster." As she spoke, young Jinxia began to sob softly. She was originally a group of students, thinking that it was just summer vacation in the last semester, so she would stay in this city for a few days before returning home. Unexpectedly, she couldn't go back. Otherwise, she might have already embarked on the path to university now. "I heard that airplanes are currently suspended, all transportation is suspended, and the whole world is exploding." Zhu Caning also thought that her uncle was gone like this. She disliked the group below, but she was weak and didn't dare to resist. She didn't even dare to say that she knew the owner of this supermarket, so she could only silently endure. At the thought of this, Zhu Caning also suffered a lot, so she hugged her little sisters and cried. When Jiang Leking arrived, what he saw was this scene. The other two teenagers were led by Zhang Yiyang to find a model bed, and after putting down the unconscious student who was burning, they all sat down to rest. The two girls instead hugged each other and cried. Ye Shang sat on her own model bed, silently reciting the imperial energy technique. Even if she slowly practiced it until the qi cultivation stage, it would be good. Once, she obtained this skill and did not practice it for a while. The reason was that its upper limit was too low, and she could only reach the stage of transforming the spirit. Her goal was to conquer the immortal path. How could she only practice one skill until the stage of transforming the spirit, so she kept forgetting it until here, regardless of size and duration, as long as she could practice it, the same skill was tried. How could this be the only way to cultivate? She's also curious, but at least now she has the power to protect herself. On the other side of the model bed, 3 young girls sat on top of each other, chatting and whispering in various low voices, each sharing their own difficulties. Xuantian said, "I haven't awakened my abilities yet. I'm afraid I'll have a fever on the road. I heard that some of them will turn into zombies or awaken their abilities. That's how those people are. There are already more people, many zombies have changed, and many have died. During the holiday period, the daily pedestrian flow in the supermarket is already high, let alone it is the only supermarket here." Jiang Leking said, "Although I have superpowers, I feel like I'm a chicken rib. I can only melt some metal, and I can't even defeat zombies. Like Ning Ning, I haven't had a fever yet. Orange had a fever for 2 days before, and I was so anxious. I thought she would be burned to death. At that time, I didn't know how many chances she would turn into a zombie. Fortunately, I wouldn't have survived either." Yang Jinxia said, "Oh, by the way, the classmate next door who is feverish heard that he is from the next class. Should we go talk and tie him up?" Jiang Leking immediately stood up and said, "Definitely, otherwise they will also become zombies. The 2 brothers who take care of him will definitely suffer." Xuantian also nodded, and after speaking, the 3 of them got up and went to the model bed next door, which was not surrounded by sheets. Because there was no sound insulation at all, the 3 of them could naturally hear what they were saying. They had already taken a bedsheet and tied them up. As soon as Xuantian and the others arrived, they saw that they had already been tied up. "You guys are quite fast," they said. The young man who had been carrying someone on his back twisted his neck and grinned, "That's natural." After pausing for a moment, he fell silent. "Unfortunately, there is a high chance that it will become a zombie," Zhang Yifan whispered. Xie Qingyuan put on a smile again and said, "It's okay. My brother Ji has his own destiny, and he must be able to awaken his powers." Xuantian and the others also looked at Xie Qingyuan, who was now tightly bound by the sheets. Due to fever and rain outside, his body was still wet. Of course, everyone was wet, but at this time, who cares about who looks like? It would be good if he could survive. And the young man with his eyes closed, no one changed his clothes for him, so it would be good if he could live. And Xie Qingyuan tied his brother tightly, afraid that if his brother turned into a zombie and bit him. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Awakening. Xuantian looked at Xie Qingyuan for a while, then looked up seriously and said to Xie Qingyuan, "Your brother is quite handsome." Zhang Yiyang twitched his lips slightly, and he knew that as long as a girl saw Xie Qingyuan, she must have looked like this. He joked, "It's no use looking good now. Becoming a zombie would be scary." Xie Qingyuan glanced at him and said, "Maybe it's an awakening ability." In fact, the 2 of them are also good-looking, each with their own type. Zhang Yiyang is as tall as 1.88 meters, taller than both of them, and his image is also good. He loves playing basketball most in school and has a good personality. Unfortunately, he has been playing with Xie Qingyuan all along. After all, Xie Qingyuan's appearance is in the top few of the school rankings. Xie Qingyuan is also a sunny big boy who spends his days with Zhang Yiyang. His brother is only 1 year older than him, but the 3 of them are classmates at the same level. If it weren't for Xie Qingyuan trying to figure out a way to stay in the warehouse of the school cafeteria this time, a group of people might not have been able to survive the first few days of the outbreak, which almost plunged the entire school into a terrifying hell, except for those who can react and run to the dormitory or behind the cafeteria. The dormitory is very close to the cafeteria, so many students are trapped there. Some can't help but organize early to rush to a city. I don't know who spread the news that someone in City A has established a base that now accommodates survivors from all over the country. Once the news was released, everyone couldn't help but feel the urge to rush there. After coming out, they didn't walk much together, only a few people they knew each other because they had suffered losses before. A student withdrew someone they didn't know and blocked the zombies. They turned their heads and looked at them with fear, saying that they didn't know that person, which was a conditioned reflex. As a result, a friend who knew that person eventually kicked him out of the cafeteria. The three girls discussed and selected some clothes to change in the nearby hangar area. Zhu Caning dare not say that women's clothing has been taken away by Ye Shang. After all, it is better not to easily expose such things as having space. Let's wait for the big shots to tell them or expose it themselves. When all three of them arrived at the clothing area, not only women's clothing, but also many men's clothing had been taken away, leaving only some types that grandpa or uncle could wear. The three of them looked at each other, and Zhu Caning unconsciously touched his nose. The supermarket must be crowded, and there are still some left now, which is pretty good. He said that Big Shot still has a bit of conscience. At least he kept some of the food and clothing inside. Although some food is not very convenient to eat immediately, there must be a way to cook it when people are definitely hungry. Yang Jinxia had to choose a set of clothes that looked relatively small and easy to move, as well as a coat that even if it was big, she had to choose one to wear. She also went to the lingerie area and chose a few more, so if she couldn't wear them, she could take two with her. There's no replacement left behind. Zhu Caning didn't say that the Big Shot space had taken away all the underwear in this area, leaving only these 2 rows. Now, the Big Shot's words still come to mind. Collecting supplies outside, you can take more. It's still early days, at least no matter what it is, leave some hope for those who come later. In fact, this original phrase was said by Ye Shang's grandmother. At that time, even if your parents are gone, no matter what you do in the future, you must have a direction for progress in your heart, even if you leave some hope for future generations. Ye Shang changed some characters and copied them to Zhu Caning. Jiang Leking also had similar choices here. As soon as the 2 of them changed clothes and came out, they saw that the 2 teenagers had also changed. There were only a few people who had just temporarily hung curtains with wide sheets, separating them. Thinking of this, Zhu Caning ran to Ye Shang's place and said, "Boss, why don't you just put away all these sheets when we leave? It feels quite convenient." Ye Shang looked at Zhu Caning's protruding head and said, Zhu Caning happily ran to the little sisters. The 3 had a good relationship when they were at school, and now they are getting along better. Even sleeping in the same bed like this. One night passed, and the next morning. The sunlight shone through the glass, and it rained almost all night last night. This morning, the sun stopped as soon as it came out. Ye Shang simply washed up and found that the mineral water she used in the supermarket did not have any cleaning techniques or dust removal techniques, so she couldn't use it. Naturally, she also wanted to maintain her maximum cleaning ability, but unfortunately, she didn't have the awakening water ability. Ye Shang walked to the other end, where there was a window. She leaned slightly against it, holding a light shadow sword in her hand, and looked down at the patrolling zombies below, surrounded by some charred black, indicating that it was done by those people last night. There were too many, almost the entire street was covered. When she came, she cleaned up a wave, but it was almost as if she knew some were dead and immediately made up for it. "We can't stay any longer. I don't know when the army will arrive, and since they have arrived, there is still a long way to reach a city. We will definitely rescue others along the way." At this moment, Xie Qingye woke up leisurely, his lips pale and peeling. He turned his gaze to look at Zhang Yiyang, who was sleeping in the next bed, and his foolish younger brother. They both came to study in a city at the beginning. Xie Qingye now felt like he was drowning all over, but he was also very thirsty, wet, and tied with a bedsheet. He said in a hoarse voice, "Qingyuan, Yang." The two of them, who were sleeping soundly, ignored him, and then his gaze turned to a figure not far away with a backlight, which was probably not a zombie. I saw the figure slowly walking towards my side. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Awakening Water System Abilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Awakening Water System Abilities. A girl wearing a black robe, holding a sword in her hand, with her hair tied into a simple ponytail. Is this cosplay? When is it now? Still dressed like this? It seems like I really love it. Seeing Ye Shang walking straight past without even seeing him open his eyes, he weakly shouted, "That classmate, can you help me untie it?" Ye Shang looked at the source of the sound and walked up. It seems you haven't turned into a zombie, so what ability should you have awakened? After speaking, a flash of sword light shattered the sheets on his body. Upon hearing her words, Ye Changlao gradually felt the power coming from within her body, an inexplicable force. I'm not sure either. Ye Shang is also interested. She still doesn't know what abilities she has awakened, and even feels like she hasn't awakened any abilities at all. You can give it a try. Ye Changlao closed her eyes and carefully felt it. Suddenly, she reached out with one hand. In front of her was Ye Shang, who urgently turned his arm and threw it to the side. Then to his right were his foolish younger brother and Zhang Yiyang, and in an instant, a jet of water sprayed down on both of them. The water column is not large, almost the size of a finger. Almost in an instant, Ye Changlao jumped up and said, "It's raining, it's raining." Zhang Yiyang's right hand also instantly caught fire and said, "Who is plotting against me?" Although the water column was not large, it basically dripped horizontally, and both of them were drenched in their upper bodies. "Don't make a fuss," Ye Changlao frowned and scolded Ye Changlao. The two of them finally quieted down. Ye Changlao stopped jumping, and Zhang Yiyang withdrew his anger. Ye Changlao jumped over happily and said, "Brother, have you awakened the water ability?" Zhang Yiyang also leaned over and said, "Changlao, it's not bad. The water ability is very effective. Especially now when there is almost no water or electricity." Ye Shang also watched the whole process on the side. Is this the awakening ability? However, she looked at Ye Changlao again and found that this ability was indeed very useful, but she didn't know if it could be consumed. Xuantian and the others also got up from the bed and ran over, feeling a burst of joy. Then a few people gathered together to discuss what to do next. Xuantian said, "We have to follow the big shot, and she promised me to safely send me back to my parents." Yang Jinsha asked, "Why do you call her a big shot?" A few people were also puzzled and looked behind the closed curtain, sitting for breakfast. A sandwich and milk, all of which were from the warehouse, as well as many packaged breads in small bags. The basic time of space pauses. As long as it is put in, it will be taken out. Xuantian straightened up slightly and glanced at a few people askance. "Yesterday was when I begged her to come down and save you. Did you forget who she split the fire with?" "Zhang Yiyang, this is my name," Zhang Yiyang chuckled. Jiang Leking was also curious and asked Xuantian, "Of course I saw her, but I can't keep calling her big shot. I feel like I'm not very excited." "What's her name?" Xuantian recalled the agreement he signed yesterday, which seemed to have written. "It seems to be called Ye Shang, the leaves of the leaves, the sorrow of Li Shang." Ye Changlao then said, "Did she always wear that cosplay uniform?" "She still holds a sword, which looks so sharp and feels like it was from ancient times." Xuantian nodded and said, "Sometimes I feel the same way, but she still has superpowers, but I can't say it unless she tells you herself." Ye Changlao listened quietly all along, then turned her head slightly to look at the bedsheets and curtains over there. Zhang Yiyang said, "Did she say anything about her plans next?" Xuantian said, "We may be on the road today, without waiting for the army, because neither Xia nor I have a fever now. We are afraid that if we get thrown away with a fever in the army, the result may be even worse." Ye Changlao nodded and said, "It makes sense, but shouldn't we ask her to come and discuss it?" As soon as he finished speaking, Ye Shang came out from behind the sheets and curtains, walked up to several people, and pointed to the bread placed on Xie Qing's bed next door. "These are breakfast. After finishing, tidy up and leave." He said to Zhu Caning, "I don't care what others do, you prepare them first." As soon as he finished speaking and wanted to leave, he turned to several people and said, "You can also keep up, but don't raise useless people." I just turned around to collect my things, and in an instant, all the sheets and other things that had been in everyone's eyes before disappeared. A few people have grown their mouths. Zhu Caning just said to the few people, "Don't be shocked. This is a spatial ability, hurry up and tidy it up." Xie Qingyuan envied and said, "This ability is really useful. In the apocalypse, what is most needed is supplies. Sometimes, how much can be stored in bags, boxes, or even in cars? Not only is it conspicuous, but it is also easy to be robbed." They just got up, finished their bread, packed their things, each carrying a big backpack with a lot of things inside. They couldn't put all the food they needed in Ye Shang's space, could they? They might not agree, and they weren't their servers. They had to ask them at any time if they needed it or if they needed it. Balabala, a few people walked up to Ye Shang, completely using her as the boss, and we all listened to your orders. Ye Shang glanced at them and said to Zhu Caning, "Take me to the garage. At least get a car first." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. I am willing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. I am willing. When several people went underground from another direction, they finally saw that the zombies in the underground garage were okay, not as many as on the road, at least not so densely packed. Zhang Yiyang opened the road with flames, and everyone looked at the vehicles ahead one by one until they saw a tall and powerful off-road vehicle. His eyes lit up and he said, "This is it, let's go." It is spacious enough to sit 7 or more people, and there is also a row of 4 seats and a trunk in the back row. This is a 3-row off-road vehicle. Ye Shang also glanced at it and said, "Very well, which one of you is driving?" Zhang Yiyang was eager to give it a try, and Ye Shang glanced at him and said, "You can't do it. You need to attack the surrounding zombies along the way." Upon hearing this, Zhang Yiyang was discouraged. His ability can be said to be very practical, as long as there are zombies, he immediately controls the fire. Xie Qingyuan stood up and said, "Let me drive it. I don't have any abilities yet, just right." There was no objection from the crowd this time. As they drove out of the basement, they saw many zombies pushing the supermarket door, and everyone inside was panicked and crowded with people they knew. Zhang Yiyang gave them a very unpleasant glance. Zhu Caning also pursed her lips tightly, feeling that she was dragging herself down and didn't dare to say anything. Jiang Leking remained silent for a moment and said, "Let's help them clean up all the zombies at the door, right?" When he said this, he was looking in the direction of Ye Shang, who is still in the early stages of the apocalypse, at least there is still some human nature. Ye Shang responded. Everyone in the car breathed a sigh of relief now, after all, who wants to follow a cold and ruthless person? Xie Qingyuan drove over and Zhang Yiyang opened the way with flames. Any zombies in front of him who rushed towards him were all set on fire. After cleaning up the zombies approaching the car, Ye Shang and Zhang Yiyang got off the car together. Zhang Yiyang set fire to them, and Ye Shang wielded a light shadow sword and slashed them. The person in the car just now saw the sword in Ye Shang's hand. The zombie was faster than cutting watermelons, and with one strike, a zombie fell to the ground. 5 minutes later, the two of them finished cleaning up the zombies. Zhang Yiyang saw that Ye Shang was ready to collect his sword and return to the car, so he rushed inside and said, "We have almost cleaned up the zombies outside the door for you. You should take care of yourself." I saw a middle-aged woman pulling at the window, ready to jump out and say, "You're so amazing, take me with you." Many people came one after another and said, "Just bring us along. I don't know how long we'll have to wait for the army." Ye Shang frowned, which was why she didn't want to meddle. As long as she helped them once, she would keep clinging to them. If she really took them away this time, it would probably become even worse in the future. She turned around and walked towards the inside of the car. The woman behind saw Ye Shang's expressionless face and turned her head before leaving, so she cursed loudly and said, "What kind of thing, cheap woman, don't take us with you. Curse you to be bitten to death by a zombie, eat it up, and have no head left. It's best. I'm sorry. It's just that, what kind of shabby shoe thing, I'm not even worthy of lifting shoes for my mother." The men following behind also started cursing together. Zhang Yiyang blacked his face and didn't care about them anymore. He turned around and left. He had intended to explain that the car might not be able to accommodate so many people, but now it seems that these people are. After cursing, seeing that they really didn't care about themselves, they left directly and felt bored. They decided to go back to the hall and sit down. If they could save some energy, it would be equivalent to saving food. Suddenly, a childish voice came from the window, "Brother, please take me and Grandpa with you, okay?" Zhang Yiyang paused for a moment. It was a skinny and yellow-skinned little boy, eagerly looking towards him, with an old man hunched beside him. Jiang Leking also saw it and bit his lower lip tightly. He decided to get off the car and go to the window, whispering to him, "Stand over here." The little boy's eyes suddenly lit up. Then she quietly melted a steel bar and saw that her body could basically accommodate the two of them, so she reached out and picked up the little boy. Turning to Zhang Yiyang, he said, "Quickly, take the old man out." Zhang Yiyang immediately reached out to help, and Jiang Leking reacted to the people inside. As she ran towards this side, she accelerated her speed and continued to restore the steel bars. Her forehead was covered in dense sweat. The two of them left with their people, and the people inside took them away. In an instant, they shouted, "We also need to go out." Jiang Leking turned his head and said, "Do you think you can come up with it?" "Sure, I can melt down the windows and iron doors, but we will immediately drive away. That car won't fit dozens of you, and you'll have to face a group of zombies when you come out." "Are you sure?" She didn't mind helping. Some people shook their heads and didn't give up, saying, "You also bring them, why don't you bring two more?" "I'm willing." Jiang Leking pulled the little boy into the car. The people inside really dare not damage the iron doors and windows. Many people also know that the car cannot accommodate so many people, and naturally do not allow those people to shout Jiang Leking to destroy this only defense. End of this chapter.